All right, so today we are looking at chapter, hold on, I always do that. Today we're looking at our sixth PowerPoint here. So this is day 7 of PFT 105. So we're looking at our sixth PowerPoint, and you'll notice the title is Exercise, Metabolism, and Bioenergetics. And what's cool about this chapter, or this PowerPoint at least, is this is an overall overview of metabolism when it comes to like energy production. It's sort of the know all be all that you need to have for metabolism here without going into too much detail. So it actually keeps some of the detail out. This slide actually comes directly out of your NASM textbook. So this is going to be chapter 4 of your regular NASM textbook. And for those of you who are watching the recording, this is the textbook that you're going to be out of. So this is your straight up NASM 6th edition book. This is your main textbook. You know, if we didn't give you any books, this is the one we would give you, because this is the overall guide for, you know, passing your NASM. So this is basically, when you look at these slides, NASM's approach to explaining metabolism. So you're going to notice a couple terms are just slightly, you know, described ever so slightly differently than they were maybe when we were talking about them in the last class. So for instance, like one of the energy systems is called your phosphagen system, depending on who you ask, and other people call it your ATP-PC system. NASM is going to call it the ATP-PC system. So anyway, you'll see a couple little things that, like, you know, they label them ever so slightly differently because it's, you know, NASM is the one teaching it, and different people label different things differently. But for the most part, this is an overall basic understanding of all of our energy systems, how we, and we're going to define bioenergetics. So it's how we, you know, take in energy and convert it into, you know, stuff, right? The way I always like to describe it, it's like, it's how you take a bowl of cereal and turn it into a 1-mile run, you know? So our purpose today, since we're talking about this, is to provide basic information on energy metabolism and bioenergetics that will be useful in helping us understand and plan safe and effective exercise programs. So the idea here is that by understanding metabolism really effectively, you'll be able to write really, really, really effective workouts for your clients. Because, like, I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of, like, beginner trainers make, is that they will simply you know, choose, you know, they'll look online and be like, let's see here, let's do total body workout. You know, they'll just kind of Google something and watch a couple videos, or, you know, find an infographic and be like, yeah, that looks good, you know. And they'll often, like, you know, bring that in with their clients, and their client will work up a good sweat. Like, make no mistake about it, if I were to put up a dartboard and throw darts at it and it had exercises on them, you know, chances are if I threw enough darts, I'd end up with a pretty decent workout, you know, something that's definitely going to get me sweating. I'm going to burn some calories. But it's not very specific, right? It's not very specific to my individual goals, which means that, like, I'm not going to get very specific results either, you know? And this is where a lot of people, you know, get frustrated by things. A lot of people struggle with this because, you know, what they'll do is they will work out very, very regularly, and then they won't really go anywhere with their results. They won't really, you know, get the results that they're kind of expecting. And it's like, you know, they're probably like, well, why not? Why didn't I get the results that I should have? I worked out every day. I stuck to my diet plan. And it's like, well, those, you know, that workout plan didn't really correspond with what it is you're aiming for physiologically. And our bodies adapt very specifically to the type of stress we place on it, because our bodies follow that, you know, general rule that I always mention, which is like, you know, form follows function. And so, like, you need your workout to look a certain way if you want your body to function a certain way. So, you know, that's kind of a big part of, like, what we're talking about today. Our objectives after this presentation are to be able to describe our primary methods for how we actually produce energy, differentiate between the different energy systems. So we do want to know very clearly what is aerobic versus very anaerobic. Talk about our different energy pathways based on, like, you know, well, what if I'm doing a duration for this? Which energy pathway am I using? We want to be able to understand that. understand how carbs, proteins, and fats interact when it comes to energy metabolism, the difference in energy between like steady state exercise versus exhaustive. So we will talk about like how, yes, you're going to burn much more energy in an exhaustive type exercise, but you're going to burn much more consistent energy during steady state, which is better, which is worse. What are we going for? It isn't, by the way, there is no better or worse. It's just different. And then we want to be able to just, differentiate between the energy requirements for those two things, and then our training adaptations that will happen to us as we begin doing different types of exercise. So those are our goals today. What's up, Andres? Good to see you, by the way. Welcome.
How's it going, Brad? Sorry, man. I'm driving at the moment.
Oh, gotcha. Well, stay safe.
Yeah, I'm actually have to get tested right now.
Oh, are you?
Or in the next hour or so. So.
Yeah, fair enough, man. Well, park me at the side and don't look.
Yeah, no, I got you.
Although I've been in those testing sites, you may be sitting around for a while, depending on where you're headed.
I'm in LAX.
Oh, that's got to be a big one.
I told you that I might be traveling soon, so I gotta do that. But yeah, sorry.
Cool. Well, all right. So we are looking at one of our key terms here, and one of the things I just was mentioning, Andres. This is actually out of your straight up NASM textbook. So this PowerPoint is meant to be sort of an overview of what it is we're going to be going over the next week in class. This is sort of like, it's almost like an intro. You know how I do all the intro slides? This is almost like an intro slide to our week.
Right.
But this is actually the metabolism chapter out of your main NASM textbooks. That's chapter 4. So I want everybody to read that chapter at some point today or tomorrow. And that's what we're going for. So if you forget everything from this physiology class, this is the chapter I want you guys to remember. Okay. Because like I said, obviously I've given you a lot of extra information. Well, this is all the boiled down information. This is the stuff that may be in your, exam when you guys take it in 9 months. So looking at bioenergetics, a key piece of vocabulary here. And this is also actually one last little thing just before I launch in. You will also notice that normally my notes, they filter out the PowerPoints. Well, you'll probably notice that the notes are pretty much the entire PowerPoint today. That kind of shows you sort of how important this PowerPoint is. And we're back. Okay, so what are bioenergetics, right? So bioenergetics, it's like biology or physiology. It's a study. It's a branch of science, right? And so it's the study of how energy is transformed through various biomechanical means, right? So basically what we're talking about when we talk about bioenergetics is we are discussing how, you can take in food and convert it to energy, or maybe you take in an excess of food and so it gets converted into fat, which is really just stored energy at the end of the day. Like we always talk about ATP. We spend so much time talking about ATP. That's our, ATP is our currency inside the body for how our cells are able to pay for all the work that they do. Your cells require burning up ATP molecules in order to be able to do stuff, right? Well, how do we create that ATP? Well, we get it from food and we get it from oxygen, which is why we've spent so much time in this course talking about the digestive and respiratory systems, because that's how we get that food and that's how we get that oxygen, right? So bioenergetics is the study of how we take all that stuff in and convert it into, all the activities of daily life. Because, why don't we just take all the calories directly in food and just burn them up immediately for energy, because there's actually going to, you're going to release a ton of energy if you were just to straight up burn it instantly once it entered your body. But it isn't, we try not to do that, or our body can't do that, because what would happen is we would basically spontaneously combust. We would overheat. We would basically just explode. We'd be really, really unstable. I mean, think about like when you throw a log on a fire, right? All that energy is just being released like crazy. That's what fire is. It's just crazy amounts of energy release. And that energy release is resulting in like these big flames. And so that energy is being converted into heat energy, and just kind of escaping through, and eventually, going somewhere else and becoming something else. And that's the same thing that happens inside of our body. We just do it on a much smaller level so that we don't burn up. And so that's why we have ATP molecules. They're our version of, little stored energy. So if we have this little stable ATP molecule, it can't just spontaneously release its energy at all times. It does to do it in a very controlled way. So we break that little phosphate off, right? Like the third little phosphate at the end of that ATP molecule, that's what we break off to release that energy. So we store it in this very stable form. But what if I need like long-term storage? What if I want to hold something onto something for a very, very long time? Well, then I need to make a decision, or my body is going to sort of choose like, well, it depends on like what type of storage we need. It's like yeah, we want long-term storage, but is it going to be long-term storage that I need to be able to access really, really quickly? Or is it long-term storage that like I can access at a generally slower pace? Well, if it's energy that I need to store, that I need to access really, really, really quickly, well, then my body is going to store nutrients in the form of glycogen. So glycogen, right? We've kind of talked about this a little bit. It's basically this wet, soupy mixture of carbohydrates that your body stores either in your liver, like we talked about, or in all the muscles throughout your body. So if you bring in an excess of carbohydrates, kind of going back to what happens when you bring energy in, right? If I bring in like an excess of carbohydrates, like more carbohydrates, then like my body is going to burn up for immediate energy. Well, then my body's going to go, great, I got extra carbohydrates and I love using carbohydrates for energy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to store it as glycogen. So your body will choose to store any excess in carbs as glycogen. And that's great because now let's say the next day you don't get anything to eat for 12 hours and you're starting to get a little hangry. Well, your body can tap into those carbohydrates and it can turn those carbohydrates into ATP, and then it can break that ATP to release its energy. So we stored glycogen as like a stored energy form inside of our body. But what happens if here's the thing, you can only store so much glycogen. You only have so much muscle, you only have so big of a liver. So what happens if your glycogen stores are full and you bring in a ton of extra carbohydrates? Well, is that sugar that those carbohydrates get broken down to? Is it just going to stay in your blood? Not really. I mean, hopefully not. If you're not a diabetic, it won't. But what'll end up happening is your body will go, well, I'm going to store this. And then your body's going to go, well, I guess all my glycogen stores are full. So you know what it'll do to store it? It'll turn it into lipids. It'll convert it into fat tissue through a process called lipogenesis. And so it'll actually make new fat cells and store that energy inside of your fat cells. And now that's great because you've got energy in the form of fat cells that in the long term, you can break that energy down and release that energy. Let's say, in the future, again, you don't get any food. Well, your body can tap into your fat stores for that energy because it stored it the last time you got way too many calories. Problem is, when we get way too much stored fat on our body, it starts to cause like a lot of physiologic problems. Fat starts to take on its own characteristics, start to act as its own sort of organ and have its own metabolism and stuff. And it kind of screws up our normal physiologic processes. So we're really grateful to have adipose tissue. We're really grateful to have fat tissue because it's a really great stored form of energy. But the problem is we have way too much of it in our version of the world. Like we've kind of created this world where it is very, very, very easy for us to bring in an excess of calories. And so that excess of calories has to get stored somewhere. Energy can't just not go somewhere. So it gets converted into fat tissue. And that can happen whether it's carbohydrates or protein or fats, it doesn't really matter. So it's not that fats are the only thing that get converted into fat tissue. A lot of times it can be carbohydrates if your glycogen stores are full. That's one reason why it's important to empty out your glycogen stores. How do you do that? Well, you work out, go burn a bunch of calories at the gym. And guess what? You just emptied out all your glycogen stores. So then you can go have a friggin' donut. And yeah, it's packed full of sugar, but for the most part, it's not going to hurt you as much as it would, if your glycogen stores were full. For the record, make a better choice than a donut. But if we're trying our hardest to find a way to make a donut less harmful, that's how you do it. Or the same thing is true of protein. If I bring in way too much protein, that protein is going to get stripped for energy. Some of it's going to get used to repair my muscles, and the excess is going to get stored, on in my fat tissue. And so that's an understanding of bioenergetics, right? It's how we transform energy. Oh, excuse me. It's how we transform energy through various biochemical means. Now, part of the conversation, that's one of our key terms there. I would definitely get that tattooed on the inside of your eyelids, get that term memorized, because you might get a question on either homework or your actual MASM exam that is like, it'll say blank is the study, and then you'll have 4 options. So knowing vocabulary is always helpful. Another key term here, what is part of our bioenergetics, is obviously the conversation on metabolism. So metabolism, all chemical reactions that are taking place inside the body, right? Like a lot of times people kind of boil metabolism down to, it's like how many calories I burn every day, or it's like how hungry I feel after I'm done doing something. All of that is kind of part of your metabolism, but it's definitely not the only part of your metabolism. What we need to understand about metabolism is that it is any and all chemical reactions that take place inside of your body. When you bring in a piece of bread and the enzymes in your saliva from that salivary amylase, right, start breaking that bread down into sugars, and that bread tastes really sweet once it hits your tongue. That's a chemical reaction. That's part of your metabolism, right? Food getting into your stomach. There's some foods that are actually so difficult to process, like food-wise. Here's a fun one, right? Like celery, for instance. Celery is mostly fiber. Like it's a lot of just like plant matter that our digestive system does not have the energy to break down, but it will try really hard. It'll try to break it down, and it'll work and digest and churn it, and finally it's like, God, I can't break this stuff down. And so then it just finally kind of passes through. Well, what's funny is like the amount of effort, the amount of work that it takes to process that celery is super high. And that's why you can eat tons of it without worrying about how many calories are in celery. It's almost a negative calorie food. And there actually are negative calorie foods out there. This is what's kind of funny. Let's Google this here. We'll go negative, that's an M, negative calorie foods, right? And what's funny about negative calorie foods is they are foods that actually take so much energy to burn that it actually processes. Processing it takes more energy than there are calories in the food. So you're going to see like on this list, it's all like fruits and vegetables and things, right? One of the funny ones is actually mustard, though. Mustard. Mustard in particular is actually really, really difficult for your body to break down. Dijon mustard, because it's basically all like, mustard seeds and stuff. I'm not talking like French's, like yellow, this stuff, because that's really like super processed. But when you get that, like, what is that? Super chunky Dijon mustard. You look at this stuff and it's got, oh, great. I clicked it. Oh, actually that does work. And it's got all these little seeds in it. Those seeds are all fiber, and your body is like, working away trying to churn that stuff up, and it really can't. It's not very good at it. So, what ends up happening is it actually burns a lot of calories. Now, does that mean that I just gave you guys the secret to weight loss and you should go put mustard on everything and now you'll burn extra calories? No, of course not. That's not what we're saying here. But like, that's what we mean when we talk about like metabolism. It's the energy released by your body from processing foods, but your body actually it takes money to make money, right? It takes energy to create energy. And so your body will actually expend energy processing food in order to release it. And then we have our exercise metabolism. Now, this term is like a special one, right? Like exercise metabolism is a unique term that we talk about as like personal trainers. And this is where, until now, we've kind of kept the conversation very much in the realm of just talking about metabolism in general and talking about energy systems in general. But exercise metabolism is a unique version here. And what I mean by this is that it is the examination of bioenergetics as it relates to the unique physiologic changes and demands placed on the body during exercise. So a lot of times when you learn this, and the way we did it here at Sochi as well, when you're learning about metabolism, you start by talking about glycolysis and how your cells can produce a little bit of energy in the absence of oxygen. And then luckily that absence of oxygen results in a bunch of lactic acid that ferments, and then that goes into the mitochondria. Meanwhile, you bring in a little bit of extra oxygen, and so the oxygen also goes into the mitochondria. And with lactic acid fermented and oxygen, your cells spit out some ATP. And that's sort of our basic version of metabolism. And that works really, really, really well to give you a good understanding of, where ATP sort of comes from. But as we look at exercise metabolism is the unique version of all of that taking place during exercise. So, what happened to all of the energy that we produced? It like if we think of like this whole thing as like a big circle, right? You produce some energy and then that energy got used. Well, what happened to all that remaining ATP from the last time I produced a whole bunch of energy? Where the heck is that? Well, it is actually kind of sitting around waiting to be used. And that's where we have like a little bit of a different energy metabolism that is meant to kind of get us to glycolysis. It's a pre-glycolysis metabolism. So, I kind of framed it as if glycolysis is the first part. Well, actually, there's one energy system that takes place before it. And like I said, that's your ATP-PC system, or sometimes referred to as your phosphagen system. And that's going to break up a bunch of stored ATP and just try to resynthesize it and break it as much as it can. It's not very good at lasting a very long time, though. So it only lasts maybe 5 to 15 seconds, depending on who you ask. I think we're going to see 5 to 10 seconds today. So, that's exercise metabolism. That's where it's very different for us to examine metabolism rather than just how we look at it in a normal biology textbook. And that's what we're talking about today. So the unique version of metabolism that takes place during exercise, right? So before we talk about if we're talking about all this, we obviously got to talk about our fuel sources. These are what we call our nutrient substrates, right? You know them as proteins, fats, and carbs. Those are our substrates. And so what happens during a metabolic breakdown, the catabolism part of metabolism, right? The taking something complicated like a protein and breaking it down into individual amino acids, right? Or taking something complicated like a carbohydrate and breaking it down into sugars, or taking something complicated like a fat and breaking it down into fatty acids, right? So, the part of that happened, those are your nutrient substrates, right? Proteins, fats, and carbs. And our body can use all three of those to produce energy. Now, carbohydrates are our body's favorite source of energy. I know we live in a world where carbs have, been demonized. Carbohydrates are often thought to be the enemy. And a big part of the reason for that is because they've got one bad offspring in the world of carbohydrates, which are like simple sugars. So when you look at like simple sugars, let's see if I can find an infographic here, versus whole foods. This kind of gets broken down into a list of good carbs versus bad carbs. See a lot of simple carbs here, right? Like, we see a lot of sugars over here, juices and things like that, candy, right? Here's more sugar, white rice, white pasta. Those are all very, very, very simple, right? Versus complex carbs, which are the kind of things that you see here. You see sweet potatoes, for instance. And fruits are actually fairly simple as well. They actually break down really quickly, but they've got a little fiber in them, and they're definitely packed full of nutrients. We see brown rice, right? We see different types of lentils and beans, whole wheat bread rather than white pasta. Things like that. Those are our complex carbs. But at the end of the day, they are all going to be broken down into glucose. They're all going to be broken down into sugar. And so that kind of leads to this world where, you know, now we got like one bad egg in the form of like soda and candy, you know, like and stuff like that. And it's kind of giving carbohydrates a bad name. And don't get me wrong, like those things are very, very bad for you. Soda has no nutritional value, and other than the fact that it is packed full of energy. And the same thing is true of like candy and stuff, you know. And so like, yeah, as far as those types of carbohydrates go, those should be avoided at all costs. They're very, very, very bad for us. But like complex carbs are a great source of our body's favorite fuel, right? Carbohydrates are used directly for metabolism. So what happens is your body will store carbohydrates in the form of glycogen. That's why your body's so good at storing carbs. It's its favorite fuel source, you know? Just like, I don't know if you guys actually do this or not, but if you go to your favorite, you know, do you have a favorite gas station or a gas station brand?
That is so weird you're saying that right now. I'm literally at a gas station about to get something to eat.
Yeah, right. But like, you know, that's the one that you go to. So in your brain, you put a little effort into like, I mean, I know I could just go to this Shell station here, but like if I just save myself a little bit of fuel, I will be able to get down the road to my favorite station, which, you know, is like 20 cents cheaper. You know?
Look, Brad.
That's awesome. I love that.
Too funny.
You said you're going to LAX. That's not the one off Century, is it?
No, it's not Manchester.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was like, because I have definitely made a million LAX trips and like, you know, barely made it on gas. And it's like, I know we're at the airport, but like, I got to stop for gas right
here.
Right. I've been to that one a million times because of that scenario. And now, you know, now I'm in my 30s and I refuse to take anybody to the airport. So like, it doesn't happen anymore. So, you know, when we're talking about carbohydrates, like I said, they're your body's favorite source of energy. And the reason they're your body's favorite is because they can be broken down for energy very, 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 very quickly. Glucose can get broken down into energy and converted to ATP so freaking fast. And so because of that, your body prefers to use carbohydrates, which means we need to have a pretty substantial amount of carbohydrates in our diet in order to fuel our body and give it enough energy to work out really hard. You know, it's like an investment, because here's the, you know, it's like investing. You know, you're going to lose some money up front, and hopefully that money is going to be converted into something larger in the long run. Well, you know, let's say we know that an excess of carbohydrates ends up getting stored as fat tissue, and we're all trying to avoid storing as much fat tissue as possible. And so, you know, you got to make this choice where you're like, all right, well, I am going to eat carbohydrates because they are going to allow me to work harder during my workout. They're my body's favorite source of energy. They give me tons of energy to work really, really hard. I'm going to make sure that I have enough carbs to make sure that I can work really, really, really hard. And, you know, those hopefully I'm going to burn up all that glycogen. I'm not going to get to an excess of carbohydrates. So, you know, as much as I love carbohydrates, don't go crazy on them. Don't go, you know, packing in sugar into your diet, just trying to get your carbs in. But like the average adult, according to the USDA, we need anywhere from 45 to 65% of our diet to come from carbohydrates, which a lot of people, you know, are getting, but they're getting them in the form of like sugars and stuff. They're getting them in these bad forms rather than, you know, things like whole wheat pasta and you know, whole grains and brown rice and things like that, you know. And so that's what we're looking at there. Now, like I said, glycogen, we do got to talk about glycogen here. So your body's favorite way to store carbohydrates is in the form of glycogen. Glycogen is how your body keeps carbohydrates around and in this conversation, even if you happen to skip a meal. So, you know, let's say you don't get to eat something and, you know, you work out really, really, really hard the day before. Well, you emptied out all your glycogen stores. So now your body's got to do something with those carbohydrates. So hopefully it's going to store those carbohydrates as glycogen. But then when you burn through that glycogen, you get nothing left, your body will switch over to burning fat as a metabolism. And you can only store so much glycogen. Let's see here. Let's look this up. How many grams of glycogen can the body store? So when we look at this, most people are going to store about 15 grams of glycogen per kilogram of body mass, right? So, let's say you weigh 80 kilograms. Well, you can store about 1,200 grams of glycogen there. So just under a pound, right? So that's how much glycogen you can actually store. And then let's see how many calories worth of energy can the body store in glycogen. Let's see if that works. About 2,000 calories worth, so that's actually a pretty substantial amount, like if you go to run a marathon, you want to make sure that your glycogen stores are full so that you are, able to have plenty of energy in that marathon. So if you guys have ever heard of carb loading, right? Well, the way carb loading works is basically what's funny about it, let's look up a carb loading schedule here. This is what's kind of funny about this. You're going to see it's actually, you will starve yourself of carbohydrates for a day or two. Yeah. So what's funny is actually in the beginning, on the very beginning, you actually deplete your glycogen stores on purpose. Because what that does is that sort of gets your body in this thing where it's like, oh God, I'm not getting any carbohydrates. And it kind of freaks out a little bit. And so your body's like, oh man, next time I get some carbs, I'm going to keep all of them. And so about 7 days out before your competition, you actually limit your carbohydrate intake. And then you sort of amp it up a little bit until, the days right before your competition, this is before you're going to be running a very extreme race. So you're not working very hard. You're only doing maybe 20-minute little workout here. The day before you actually rest, right? But you actually have a massively high, 70% of your calories coming from carbohydrates, which is a pretty substantially high amount, right? And what's going to happen is your body is going to store all those carbohydrates. You'll have extra glycogen. That glycogen is going to, give you energy while you are running this marathon. And then hopefully you're also bringing, a little bit of sugar into your body during that marathon in the form of, Gatorade or orange juice or they give you orange slices in marathons and stuff at the check-in stations. So, little things like that are going to hopefully keep those sugar levels high as well. So you never really run out of glycogen. Because if you run out of glycogen, a lot of marathoners, they refer to it as hitting the wall. It's a term that marathoners use. And hitting the wall is where that's it. You've got no glycogen left in your body, but your body still needs to produce energy. So it needs to switch. It needs to switch from using carbohydrates as a fuel source to using fat as a fuel source. And that switch is rough feeling. Now, don't get me wrong, your body's actually pretty good at it, but fat takes longer to break down metabolically than carbohydrates do, because it has to go through a different physiologic process that we're going to look at here in a little bit. So because that is so much more difficult and slower, there's this moment where it feels like there's this little bit of time where it's it feels like you're running through sludge, because you're just oh, what is happening to my body? Why can't I've been producing energy, I've been good, and now I'm just I feel crappy, my head hurts because your brain's not getting any energy. You just feel like junk. And then you get on that fat metabolism, you start feeling a little bit better after that. Because your body is all right, we finally caught up, but it's using a slower fuel source. So your body can store, like I said, store carbohydrates in the form of them. That's what our glycogen is. Now your body can also, like I said, use fat. Fat is also used directly for metabolism. We kind of talked about that just now. But that is, this actually has the most calories in it, which is kind of fun. Fat actually has more calories in it per gram than carbohydrates do. If you think about carbohydrates, they got 4 calories in every gram. Fat's got 9 calories in every gram. That's way more, actually. So luckily, it's a very efficient food, packed full of energy. But like I said, it takes longer to break down. So your body only prefers to do that when it's under a very low intensity. If you are at a high intensity, your body likes to use carbs. Carbs break down quickly. So if I'm sprinting, carbs are a really good fuel source. But if I'm walking or jogging at a slow pace. Well, fat is actually a pretty decent, source of energy there. And when I'm asleep, fat is my favorite source of energy. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. Your body is basically living off of fat while you're asleep.
Wait, what did you say about sleep?
Yeah, so when you're sleeping, your body's favorite source of fuel is fat, actually. That's your body is mostly breaking fat molecules down for energy to keep your bodily systems alive while you're asleep.
Oh, wow.
The lower your intensity is, the more your body prefers to burn energy from fat because it's a slow process. And so, like right now, you're mostly in a fat burning zone, substantially actually. Even if you're up and walking around and fueling up your car. I'm sitting here. Kenny, I'm sure you're sitting down right now, right? All of us are in a pretty rested state right now, so most of us are burning fat for fuel because our body doesn't want to use the carbohydrates. It doesn't want to use glycogen because glycogen's our emergency, super fuel that we use for like explosive stuff. So our body's coasting on the easy stuff right now. But if I were to start doing some burpees here in the background, my intensity is going to spike. And so because my intensity is spiking and I'm going to need to produce energy on the go quickly, and I need it right now, well, then my body is going to use carbohydrates instead. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. We're going to see that. That's going to come up here in a little bit. I'm going to build a little chart that'll make that easy to understand. Fats are great. And then the third fuel source is protein. And your body really tries not to use protein for energy. Your body wants to use protein to build up, different tissues and keep your body alive. I mean, you're a big wet sack of protein, like your body needs to be able to like repair that so that it doesn't like break down because you're creating cellular damage all the time. I mean, even if I just clip my arm on my desk here and give myself a little scrape on the old skin, right? Like that's all damaged protein. Well, now my body's going to go, oh, all right, we'll make some new skin cells. My body's going to get to work repairing stuff, right? My hamstrings are hopefully mid repair right now because I did some heavy freaking deadlifts yesterday and my legs are killing me. I don't want my protein to get used up for fuel. I want my protein to fix my freaking legs. And so our body really tries not to use protein, but I do want to show you really quickly. We're going to talk about this more in our nutrition class, more than we're going to talk about it today. But if we look at like carb versus fat versus protein chemistry. So let me show you what a protein looks like versus a carb. Actually, this is actually going to be kind of hard to find. They never put them on the same picture. No. All right. That's not bad. I'm going to pull that up, pull that into a new tab. Let's see here. Amino acid. All right. We'll pull that open. And fatty acid. Actually, you know what? That's not even, that'll work. It's fine. Here's a fatty acid. Okay. Ooh, but I don't want the black background. There we go. Oh my God, come on. Hey, there we go. All right. Here's a carb, right? There's a molecule of glucose. Here's a single amino acid. I don't know which amino acid this is, but it's one of the 20. And there's a fatty acid over here. Don't pay attention to this. This is trans fat, which is evil. But here's our good fats. If you look at the ingredients, like the elements, right, the atoms that make up proteins, fats, and carbs, they're really similar. Look at carbohydrates. You can see they are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, right? They're just arranged in this shape right here. Fats, guess what? Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The ingredients in fats and the ingredients in carbohydrates are literally identical. They're just in a different shape. So because they're in a different shape, they are broken down differently, right? If I were, I'm trying to come up with a fast analogy for this. Imagine if like I was playing with some Legos and I had them all stacked just together, like one on top of the other in a nice, super simple straight line. That's easy for me to break down. So I can just be like, pop, 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 and I can break that Lego piece apart, in a couple seconds. But if it was really in this like weird shape and I got, and I'm trying to break it down, I got to break it from here and then there. It's going to take me a little bit longer and I'm going to be like, I get lost for a second. And I'm like, oh, there's the piece, right? It's going to take me a second to like figure out which one to break down. So that's great if I'm like cleaving off little bits at a time for long sustained energy. So that's kind of where we get carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are really easy to be broken down and release their carbon for energy. Whereas like fats are a little bit more complicated, even if they do have like more energy trapped within them because they're just a little bit bigger, right? They're slower to break energy. So there's our explosive energy, right? Carbohydrates. There's our long sustained energy. There's our fat. And then here's our unpreferred energy. And proteins, like I said, they have the same ingredients, hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen, but you'll notice this little blue dot right here and this little red one right here. These are actually both made of nitrogen. The reason this is called R is because what you're not seeing here is, if you were to zoom in on this, you'd see a weird, funky little shape on the inside, which is also made of nitrogen. That's called a side chain, or sometimes it's called an R group, and it's what gives you all 20 different amino acids. This one's going to be shaped like this. That one's going to be shaped like that. That one's going to be shaped. Yeah, they're just slightly different from each other. But at the end of the day, hydrogen, nitrogen, carbon, and oxygen. So your body can't use nitrogen to produce energy. It's kind of in the way. So this is actually the most very complicated molecule, right? Super simple, easy to break down, a little bit more complicated, very complicated, and it's got something in the way. So in order to use proteins for energy, which your body doesn't like to do because it wants to use that protein to fix the body, and also because it's harder to release the energy, if it needs to get energy from protein, it's got to strip this nitrogen out of here. It needs to pull the nitrogen out and just throw it away, and then reassemble the oxygen, carbon, and hydrogen in a shape that it can use to produce energy. And guess what it'll do? It will modify that shape and it will make it look like this. Our carbohydrates. So what's funny is if you eat too much protein, your body will just simply rip the nitrogen off that protein. And now all of a sudden there's just nitrogen floating around, which we'll talk about here in just a second. And it will convert that protein into a molecule of glucose. It will convert it into carbohydrates. And now you're just going to go through your normal carbohydrate metabolism just like you would have. That process of stripping that nitrogen out of there, we have a term for that. That is called gluconeogenesis. This is another one of our key vocabulary terms that I want you guys to know. So proteins are converted into glucose through the process of gluconeogenesis, and then that glucose is used for metabolism, just like it normally would be, right? Carbohydrates are broken down into glucose to be used for metabolism. Fats are directly used for metabolism. Proteins are broken down into glucose. Then that glucose goes right back through our normal process here. So gluconeogenesis is the formation of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, such as our amino acids, aka our proteins. So, that's a whole process. Now, here's the thing. You're also left with leftover nitrogen, right? Well, what happened to that? If your body ripped it off of there and threw it away, where did it go? It's still inside, right? Well, now you've got to it's basically extra waste. And so your body's got to get rid of it somehow. So, that waste product is going to be picked up and hopefully expunged from the body. Where is it going to get it from? Well, for the most part, you're going to pee a lot of it out. It's going to get processed and run through your kidneys. This is where you'll sometimes hear people say that high protein diets are bad for your kidneys. That's, I think, an oversimplification. I don't think it's necessarily true that high protein is bad for your kidneys, but it does mean that your kidneys have to do more work. And, if your kidneys are in good shape, they can handle that more work, but if they're not in such good shape, that might be, a rough process, that could lead to kidney damage. The other thing is your urine is actually going to have, it's going to have extra urea in it. It's going to have all that extra nitrogen in it. And that's going to make your urine smell worse. Also, when you're sweating, that's actually one of the ways that our body vents urea is that we also sweat it out. So a lot of times super high protein diets can also cause like body odor issues and things like that. So these are sort of the drawbacks to having a super high protein diet. Now we want to have adequate protein, make no mistake about it, but it's just when we go over top, if we're getting all of our calories from protein, it's just not how we want to do things. So those are sort of what we're looking at in terms of our substrates. Do you guys have any questions about those before we move on to our next section? Kenny, how you feeling? Andres, feeling good?
Yeah.
So far, so clear.
All right, awesome. Well, let's talk about energy, right? So ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, right? Like I said, this is the primary source of energy for immediate metabolism. So you guys know me. I love to show crash course videos. I'm going to show a video that we are going to watch a lot of times. We will be watching this video again in 6 weeks. I show this video a lot in class. But we've got a crash course video on metabolism here. So crash course metabolism. This has.
I have one question.
Yeah, what's up?
About energy.
Yeah.
Let's just say you have a lot of I guess fat in your stomach.
Sure.
And that builds up like. Hold on, I gotta figure out the right word to say it.
Take your time.
Yes. Okay. So if you don't work out or anything and it just sits there.
Yeah.
Fat is still burning, like you were saying earlier, but energy, is it the same thing?
So correct me if I'm wrong if I word this the wrong way, but so you're saying is if you create fat and you don't really get to use it, is it going to, are you going to burn fat from somewhere else? Right? Is that kind of?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, something like that. I know from walking or, but you just said from resting or just how we're just sitting here listening, we're still burning something, right?
Yeah, it still takes energy, it still takes calories to keep us alive.
Also even talking, that burns, right?
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you passively burn, Andres, if I had to assume, just based on what I've, seen of you in Zoom calls and stuff, I wouldn't be surprised if you burn around 1,800 calories worth of energy. If I were to, conk you on the head and you were to go into a coma, you would burn about, if I just looking at you, I would guess somewhere between around 1,800 calories per day.
Whoa.
Kenny, I would bet that you burn somewhere around 1,650 per day. You guys want to see if I'm right?
Yeah, and that's just by sitting down?
Yeah, that is your in a coma, you are asleep calories. Okay. So there's a term for that. It's called your basal metabolic rate. Let's see if we can calculate it. Andres, how old are you?
35.
35. And how tall are you?
I want to say 5'8", maybe 5'7" though.
5'8". Oh, I would have assumed taller. I might be a little off. How much do you weigh?
I haven't even weighed myself. Thinking 190. I'm gonna estimate probably 190.
That's
185.
This is all just for fun anyway. So that's fine. So let's hit calculate here.
Oh wow.
1771. I was close.
That is really, how'd you do that? That's crazy.
Doing this, I used to do this for 30 people a day.
Right.
And if you happen to know your body fat percentage, we can actually use a slightly different formula. If your body fat percentage, watch this. If we change your body fat percentage, let's say it's 30%, you'll actually watch this number go down to 16.
Really?
But let's say your body fat percentage is 15%. We'll watch it go up massively. So the reason for that is because the lower fat is a very low energy, material. Like when you have a lot of excessive body fat, your body doesn't burn. If you had two people, one weighs 200 pounds, the other one weighs 200 pounds, one has a higher body fat percentage, because some of that 200 pounds is fat tissue burns very little energy, which again is what makes it so good as like a stored form of energy. We don't want it taking up too much energy while we're trying to create an energy balance, right? That's, that wouldn't be very efficient. But some of the lower body fat percentage, we're assuming that their tissue is probably more likely to be like muscle tissue. Muscle burns a lot of energy to keep all those cells alive. So that's where these numbers change. But if we just go back to like the kind of classic Mifflin St. Jeor formula, we'll see this number right here. They don't take into Mifflin, these are three different formulas. This formula does not take into account body fat percentage.
What is that called? The BMR calculator?
Your BMR calculator. So it's your basal metabolic rate. And this is the number of calories that you burn at base. So when you are resting, right? This is your coma calories, right? If you were to sleep for 24 straight hours, you would still burn this many every day. Now, if you're sedentary and you just live your normal life, like right now, like let's say like you don't work out today and you just live your life, well, you'll probably burn somewhere around this many calories over the course of the day. So you'll notice there's not really a huge difference between sleeping and just simply walking around sedentary, It's a difference of what is that? About 600 calories, right? But if you exercise just a little bit, that averages out to burning an extra 300 a day if you exercise 3 days a week, because it'll probably be like maybe 500 one day, 500 the next, and 500 the third. Take that over a week, that's around an extra like 300 a day, maybe, or maybe a little less.
What about being in a food coma?
A food coma? Well, unfortunately, that doesn't burn very much energy. But yeah, so anyway, these are numbers that we use. I'm going to teach you guys how to do this. We're actually going to have a math day in our nutrition class where I'm going to teach you this formula. Not because you'll ever have to do it, because there are a million calculators online, but because it's a good way to memorize the concept.
Okay.
So I don't need you to be good at math, but we will have one math day. Kenny, you want to calculate your numbers?
Yeah, let's try it out.
I'm saying 1650. How old are you?
22.
22. How tall are you?
5'7".
5'7". How much do you weigh?
145.
And 1616. I was off by about 40 calories on both you guys.
No, but that's pretty good.
Not bad, right?
Yeah.
I used to work at a weight loss resort, and I would, run people through these machines.
I have a question about those resorts and stuff, or like Weight Watchers or something. Do those actually help? I mean, a lot?
Well, that is it's sort of a loaded question. I could totally just say the same thing about personal trainers, right?
Right.
Does hiring a personal trainer work?
Yeah, no, I hear you. Yeah, I know you I mean, you got to put in the effort, obviously. Yeah.
When I worked at Biggest Loser, which is it was a resort setting. We were training 80 people a week. And then a new group of guests would come in the next week, or some people would stay over. We had people stay for several months at a time. I watched people lose, 50, 60 pounds over the course of, a couple weeks or months, and then I watched them keep it off. I saw some amazing stories. I saw people lose hundreds of pounds over several years successfully because of what they learned while they were there. And then I saw a lot of other people who lost a substantial amount of weight. Then they'd leave and they'd gain it back, and they'd come back and they'd lose some weight again. Then they'd leave, and and it was a big sort of rough process. So, Weight Watchers can be effective if it's the thing that helps you stick to it. Really, at the end of the day, anything or everything can work.
Right.
If it's done right,
Yeah.
Like my nephew just had an ankle surgery yesterday. He was really worried about it, and now he's like, I regret it, because he's off his feet he's not even allowed to walk on his ankle for the next 4 weeks.
Wow.
And but he literally didn't have an ATL ligament, which is the ligament on the side of your ankle. And so I was like, hey man, like that's, you got to get that ligament, otherwise you're never going to be able to exercise. And so he's all freaked out about it. And he's like, what if it comes back worse? What if it's not as strong as it was before? And it's like, if you do your physical therapy and you do everything you're supposed to do, you don't come back early, you don't walk on your ankle when you're not supposed to. If you do all the things that your doctor says, it'll work. When you hear about, something not working, it is almost always human error.
Yeah.
So
I agree for sure.
Yeah. So it's a tough question. My mom didn't succeed on Weight Watchers. She did that when I was in high school. But have other people succeeded? Absolutely. Okay. And what sucks? Here's a weird thing to tell you, especially since you're, new to the program and you're just starting your career as a personal trainer. You might not work for someone, and that's totally okay. There's so many clients that I fired where I'm just like, we're not a good fit.
Really?
Yeah, it happens all the time. It's just one of those things where it's like, this is a relationship, and it's like, I'm not for you.
Is it just like difficult people, or just the chemistry wasn't there? Or...
Yeah, chemistry. It's maybe I communicate in such a way that it doesn't really work, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, when you're starting out, don't be wrong. When you're starting out, take every client you can get. But later down the road, if I had this client who I as a regular person, I really admire. She was a social worker. She did a lot of good in the world. But because of how chaotic her social work job was, I was the busiest trainer at my club. I did not have the ability to move my clients around. Like, they were locked in. Like, my schedule was airtight. And she was I had an opening. And so when I got an opening, I got a new client to fill it. It was her. And she would text me every time, hey, I gotta cancel. I can't make it. I've been up, I've been up all night helping this kid get out of this bad foster situation. And I was like, that is so amazing that you did that. And, you're there making a really positive impact on the world. But like, I'm never going to get to, she's like, do you have another slot available? And I was like, I don't have another slot available. And so like, I'd be like, look, I'm not going to charge you. Even though normally we require 24 hours notice for cancellation. And then it would happen again, literally the next day and the next day and the next day. And I was like, look, you need a starting out trainer. You need someone who's not established, whose schedule is a little emptier, so that you can stop canceling and you can start moving your session. And so I fired her. I told her, I was like, look, I'm not going to train you anymore. I'm giving your number to my boss, and he is going to find you a new trainer. And I wish you the best of luck. And it was rough. She didn't like it. She was very upset with me. But the reality is that was what's good for her.
Right.
I didn't do it to be spiteful. I didn't do it because I didn't want to work with her. I really, like I said, I really admired her, but it's just like, I just was not the right fit. And that's okay. It's totally okay. That's a lesson that's you're gonna think back on this moment, like the first time you cancel, the first time you're like, nope, not you and me. And you're gonna go, I remember him telling me this, and it's gonna happen probably, a year after you start.
Good point.
When you first start, you're just taking everybody. What was that? Sorry, I lost that last part. All right, here we go. Kenny, did you have a question? I saw your mic turn on, and I didn't hear from you.
Oh no, I was just thinking about that about you firing that client. It was just it was.
Yeah, it sounds weird, right? And it sounds snobby in a way. But trust me, it's
well, it makes sense too. Like, even in massage, like, if the person is being inappropriate or something, like, I can't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and that's a very, very weird gray area to be in. You know what I mean?
Seriously, dude, as somebody who is like the most repressed person I know, I'd never make it in the massage world. The first inappropriate comment, and I'd be like, I'm out later.
Yeah, well, man, I mean, in clinic when I was doing externship, I mean, I mean, there was some people that it's kind of weird. I mean, that's all I'm going to say. But
I believe you, 100%.
yeah, but you know, overall, I mean, that was just a handful of times. It wasn't like everybody, but you know.
Right. Oof. All right.
Yeah.
So here we go. We're gonna have 2 videos to get through. Let's get a little metabolism going. Actually, wait a minute. Is this the one I want? No. Sorry. This one? This one.
Need a professional logo for your brand? I've used the new Wix logo maker to create one for my startup. I'll show you how. Here's a couple of words.
So for the record, this is gonna be. Oh wait, this is not the right one either. The sandwich one. There.
Oh.
Is it this one? Yeah, it's this one. Okay. So I'm going to show this video again in the future, just so you guys are aware. But here we go. And also pay no attention to his form when this is a this is not a lesson on how to work out because he does a very bad job.
Oh, hello there. I'm at the gym. I don't know why you're here, but I'm going to do some push-ups. So you can join me on the floor if you want. Now, I'm not doing this just to show off or anything. I'm actually doing this for science. Okay. Ugh. You see what happened there? My arms moved, my shoulders moved, my back and stomach muscles moved, my heart pumped blood to all those different places. It's pretty neat, huh? Well, it turns out that how we make and use energy is a lot like sports or other kinds of exercise. It can be hard work and a little bit complicated, but if you do it right, it comes with some tremendous payoff. But unlike hitting a ball with a stick, it's so marvelously complicated and awesome that we're still unraveling the mysteries of how it all works. And it all starts with a marvelous molecule that is one of your best friends, ATP. Today I'm talking about the energy and the process our cells and other animal cells go through to provide themselves with power. Cellular respiration is how we derive energy from the food that we eat, specifically from glucose, since most of what we eat ends up as glucose. Here's the chemical formula for one molecule of glucose. In order to turn this glucose into energy, we're going to need to add some oxygen, 6 molecules of it to be exact. Through cellular respiration, we're going to turn that glucose and oxygen into 6 molecules of CO2, 6 molecules of water, and some energy that we can use for doing all of our push-ups. So that's all well and good, but here's the thing. We can't just use that energy to run a marathon or something. First, our bodies have to turn that energy into a really specific form of stored energy called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. You've heard me talk about this before. People often refer to ATP as the currency of biological energy. Think of it as an American dollar. It's what you need to do business in the US. You can't just walk into a Best Buy with a handful of Chinese yen or Indian rupees and expect to be able to buy anything with them, even though they're technically our money. Same goes with energy. In order to be able to use it, our cells need energy to be transferred into adenosine triphosphate to be able to grow, move, create electrical impulses in our nerves and brains, everything. A while back, for instance, we talked about how cells use ATP to transport some kinds of materials in and out of its membranes. To jog your memory about that, you can watch that episode right here. Now, before we see how ATP is actually put together, let's look at how cells can cash in on the energy that's stashed in there. Well, adenosine triphosphate is made up of a nitrogenous base called adenine with a sugar called ribose and 3 phosphate groups attached to it. Now, one thing you need to know about these 3 phosphate groups is that they are super uncomfortable sitting together in a row like that, like 3 kids on a bus who hate each other all sharing the same seat. So because the phosphate groups are such terrible company for each other, ATP is able to do this nifty trick where it shoots one of the phosphate groups off the end of the seat, creating ADP, or adenosine diphosphate, because now there are just 2 kids sitting on a bus seat. In this reaction, when the 3rd jerk kid is kicked off the seat, energy is released. And since there are a lot of water molecules just floating around nearby, an OH pairing, that's called a hydroxide, from one of the H2Os comes over and takes the place of that 3rd phosphate group, and everybody is much happy. By the way, when you use water to break down a compound like this, it's called hydrolysis, hydro from water and lysis from the Greek word for separate. So now that you know how ATP is spent, let's see how it is minted nice and new by cellular respiration. Like I said, it all starts with oxygen and glucose. In fact, textbooks make a point of saying that through cellular respiration, 1 molecule of glucose can yield a bit of heat and 38 molecules of ATP. Now, it's worth noting that this number is kind of a best case scenario. Usually it's more like 29 or 30 ATPs, but whatever. People are still studying this stuff, so let's stick with that number, 38. Now, cellular respiration isn't something that just happens all at once. Glucose is transformed into ATPs over 3 separate stages: glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. Traditionally, these stages are described as coming one after the other, but really everything in the cell is kind of happening all at the same time. But let's start with the first step, glycolysis, or the breaking down of the glucose. Glucose, of course, is a sugar. You know this because it's got an ose at the end of it. And glycolysis is just the breaking up of glucose's 6-carbon ring into 2 3-carbon molecules called pyruvic acids, or pyruvate molecules. Now, in order to explain exactly how glycolysis works, I'd need about an hour of your time and a giant cast of finger puppets, each playing a different enzyme. And though it would pay me to do it, I would have to use words like phosphoglucoisomerase. But a simple way of explaining it is like this. If you want to make some money, you got to spend some money. Glycolysis needs the investment of 2 ATPs in order to work, and in the end, it generates 4 ATPs for a net profit, if you will, of 2 ATPs. In addition to those 4 ATPs, glycolysis results in 2 pyruvates and 2 super energy-rich morsels called NADH, which are sort of the love children of a B vitamin called NAD+, pairing with energized electrons and a hydrogen to create storehouses of energy that will later be tapped to make ATP. To help us keep track of all the awesome stuff we're making here, let's keep score. So far, we've created 2 molecules of ATP and 2 molecules of NADH, which will be used to power more ATP production later. Now, a word about oxygen. Like I mentioned, oxygen is necessary for the overall process of cellular respiration, but not every stage of it. Glycolysis, for example, can take place without oxygen, which makes it an anaerobic process. In the absence of oxygen, the pyruvates formed through glycolysis gets rerouted into a process called fermentation. If there's no oxygen in the cell, it needs more of that NAD+ to keep the glycolysis going, so fermentation frees up some NAD+, which happens to create some interesting byproducts. For instance, in some organisms like yeasts, the product of fermentation is ethyl alcohol, which is the same thing as all of this lovely stuff. But luckily for our day-to-day productivity, our muscles don't make alcohol when they don't get enough oxygen. If that were the case, working out would make us drunk, which actually...
So for the record, actually, there are examples of human beings who will actually be born with like a biologic disorder where their cells, when they produce too much glycolysis, actually do produce ethyl alcohol. It's called autobrewery syndrome. And it's a medical condition where when you do too much energy production, your body makes too much ethyl alcohol and you are basically drunk 24 hours a day. It is not awesome. It's actually a pretty rough condition. But that is, there are humans that actually have been known to do this, but generally it is plants like barley and hops and all the stuff that you find, grapes, all the different types of alcohol we have. So
get enough oxygen. If that were the case, working out would make us drunk, which actually would be pretty awesome. But instead of ethyl alcohol, they make lactic acid, which is what makes you feel sore after that workout that kicked your butt. So your muscles used up all the oxygen they had, and they had to kick into anaerobic respiration in order to get the energy that they needed. And so you have all this lactic acid building up in your muscle tissues. Oh.
You got a question, Anders? What's up?
Yeah, probably about like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I was working out pretty intensely, and it got to the point where I worked out so hard that I started crying for no reason. Is that like and I know he was talking about being like feeling kind of drunk or something.
Yeah.
But it almost felt like such a euphoric feeling where, I started crying.
That's more likely. That is likely you have like a lot of just endorphins and hormones running through your body. Those are going to bind to whatever place they can find in your brain. And if that triggers like an emotional response, that will definitely happen.
Crazy. Sorry, I didn't mean to get emotional.
No, totally. Yeah, no, it's just that's a response to, stress. But yeah, stuff like that happens all the time.
Okay, just wanted to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, back to the score. Now we have made 2 molecules of ATP through glycolysis, but your cells really need the oxygen in order to make the other 30 submolecules that they need. And that is because the next 2 stages of cellular respiration, the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, are both aerobic processes, which means that they require oxygen. And so we find ourselves at the next step in cellular respiration. After glycolysis comes the Krebs cycle. So while glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm, or the fluid medium within the cell that all the organelles hang out in, the Krebs cycle happens across the inner membrane of the mitochondria, which are generally considered the power centers of the cell. The Krebs cycle takes the products of glycolysis, those carbon-rich pyruvates, and reworks them to create another 2 ATPs per glucose molecule, plus some energy in a couple of other forms, which I'll talk about in a minute. Here's how. First, one of the pyruvates is oxidized, which basically means that it's combined with oxygen. One of the carbons off the 3-carbon chain bonds with an oxygen molecule and leaves the cell as CO2. What's left is a 2-carbon compound called acetyl coenzyme A, or acetyl-CoA. Then another NAD+ comes along, picks up a hydrogen, and becomes NADH. So our 2 pyruvates create another 2 molecules of NADH to be used later. As in glycolysis, and really all life, enzymes are essential here. They are the proteins that bring together the stuff that needs to react with each other, and they bring them together in just the right way. These enzymes, for example, bring together a phosphate with an ADP to create another ATP molecule for each pyruvate. Enzymes also help join the acetyl-CoA in a 4-carbon molecule called oxaloacetic acid. I think that's how you pronounce it, together, and they form a 6-carbon molecule called citric acid, and I'm certain that that's how you pronounce that one, because yeah, it's the stuff that's in orange juice.
So that right there, that process he was talking about how enzymes are really important, right? The enzymes, he's not really talking about it here, but the enzymes that he is talking about are your B vitamins. That's actually how B vitamins, people always say like B vitamins give you energy. Well, they don't necessarily have any energy in them, but they do allow you to do the Krebs cycle, and the Krebs cycle produces energy. So do B vitamins have energy? No. Do they assist in your metabolism? Sometimes. Now, does that mean you take do they assist in your metabolism? Yes, always. Do you need to take a B vitamin supplement? Probably not if you have plenty of B vitamins in your diet. But
is that a B complex?
Yeah, like the B complex.
Okay.
Yep,
Yeah.
those are all your B vitamins, 1 through 12. Not that there are 12 of them. Skip some numbers actually, but that's your B complex. And yeah, that complex, actually you can kind of see it in this picture here. See all these little different pieces, these different steps? Those are different enzymes cleaving off different parts of the Krebs, and that's why it's the cycle, right? So it's the acetyl, it's the all of those different materials getting produced in glycolysis that eventually come and act as ingredients for our Krebs cycle, so that they can get converted into that acetyl coenzyme A, acetyl-CoA is what you hear people refer to it as. That, by the way, is where fat metabolism starts. So fat, when you break down a molecule of fat, it basically skips glycolysis, because glycolysis is producing energy from glucose, right? Which, like I said, is very, very explosive. It's very, very fast. Well, fat can skip that whole process. It goes through this process called beta oxidation. And so basically it oxidizes a little bit of the fat, leaving you with acetyl-CoA. And that acetyl-CoA can now go through the Krebs cycle. But remember, the Krebs cycle is aerobic, which means that you have to have lots of oxygen present in order to be able to do it, which is why, again, your body prefers glucose metabolism when it wants to do intense work, and it relies on fat metabolism, like the Krebs cycle, when it wants to do low intense work. So you are primarily relying on the Krebs cycle right now because you're at rest. But if we need to start exercising, we are going to rely on glycolysis instead. All right, so let's look at a little biography of Hans Krebs. He's the guy who discovered this whole thing.
Fun fact, the Krebs cycle is also known as the citric acid cycle because of this very byproduct. However, it is usually referred to by the name of the man who figured it all out. Hans Krebs an ear, nose, and throat surgeon who fled Nazi Germany to teach biochemistry at Cambridge, where he discovered this incredibly complex cycle in 1937. For being such a total frickin' genius, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1953. Anyway, the citric acid is then oxidized over a bunch of intricate steps, cutting carbons off left and right to eventually get back to oxaloacetic acid, which is what makes the Krebs cycle.
B vitamin, B vitamin, B vitamin.
And as the carbons get cleaved off the citric acid, there are leftovers in the form of CO2 or carbon dioxide, which are exhaled by the cell and eventually by you. You and I, as we continue our existence as people, are exhaling the products of the Krebs cycle right now. Good work. This video, by the way, using a lot of ATP making it. Now, each time a carbon comes off of the citric acid, some energy is made, but it's not ATP. It's stored in a whole different kind of molecular package. This is where we go back to NAD+ and its sort of colleague, FAD. NAD+ and FAD are chummy little enzymes that are related to B vitamins, derivatives of niacin and riboflavin, which you might have seen in the vitamin aisle. These B vitamins are good at holding on to high energy electrons and keeping that energy until it can get released later in the electron transport chain. In fact, they're so good at it that they show up in a lot in those high energy vitamin powders that the kids are taking these days. NADs and FADs are like batteries, big awkward batteries that pick up hydrogen and energized electrons from each pyruvate, which in effect charges them up. The addition of hydrogen turns them into NADH and FADH2 respectively. Each pyruvate yields 3 NADHs and 1 FADH2 per cycle. And since each glucose has been broken down into 2 pyruvates, that means that each glucose molecule can produce 6 NADHs and 2 FADH2s. The main purpose of the Krebs cycle is to make these powerhouses for the next and final step, the electron transport chain. Now comes the time when you're saying, sweet pyruvate sandwiches, Hank, aren't we supposed to be making ATP here? Let's make it happen, Captain. What's the holdup? Well, friends, your patience is finally paying off, because when it comes to ATPs, the electron transport chain is the real moneymaker. In a very efficient cell, it can net a whopping 34 ATPs. So remember all those NADHs and FADH2s that we made in the Krebs cycle? Well, their electrons are going to provide the energy that will work as a pump along a chain of channel proteins across the inner membrane of the mitochondria where the Krebs cycle occurred. These proteins will swap these electrons to send hydrogen protons from inside the very center of the mitochondria across its inner membrane to the outer compartment of the mitochondria. But once they're out, the protons want to get back to the other side of the inner membrane because there's a lot of other protons out there. And as we've learned, nature always tends to seek a nice, peaceful balance on either side of the membrane. So all of these anxious protons are allowed back in through a special protein called ATP synthase. And the energy of this proton flow drives this crazy spinning mechanism that squeezes some ADP and some phosphates together to form ATP. So the electrons from the 10 NADHs that come out of the Krebs cycle have just enough energy to produce roughly 3 ATPs each. And we can't forget our friends, the FADH2s. We have 2 of them, and they make 2 ATPs each. And voila, that is how animal cells the world over make ATP through cellular respiration. Now, just to check, let's reset our ATP counter and do the math for a single glucose molecule once again. We made 2 ATPs for each pyruvate during glycolysis. We made 2 during the Krebs cycle. And then during the electron transport chain, we made about 34. And that is just for 1 molecule of glucose. Imagine how much your body makes and uses every single day. Don't spend it all in one place. Now you can go back, watch any parts of this episode that you didn't quite get. And I really want to do this quickly because I'm getting very tired. If you want to ask us questions, you can see us in the YouTube comments below, or of course, you can connect with us on Facebook or Twitter.
Roll the credits here, just finish up the video real quick. All right, so that is obviously very, very complicated. But those are your B6 and your B12, right? Those are the niacin and the riboflavin. That's what's allowing all the, that stuff to take place, which is why you see them being sold as like energy makers, like what is it? What's that stuff they sell? B vitamin drink. You see a million of these. They got the Gatorade one that has the vitamins, the B vitamins in it. Life water, and you know, vitamin water and even Red Bulls. Like Red Bulls are oftentimes just packed full of B vitamins, in addition to all the sugar and caffeine and stuff. So, you know, you see stuff like that constantly everywhere, you know, but it's like, again, flooding your system with that stuff, if you're not using it to produce energy, or if you're not giving yourself like glucose, you know, like it's not, a lot of it's not necessarily going to make like a big help in the end. And you are supposed to get it from food, like food. So, all right. So you do not have to have,
what is to you what is the best, I guess, vitamin B foods?
ironically, I mean, best meaning like packed full, you'll actually find a ton of them in pork products, actually. But the
I love
problem
pork
is,
so much.
yeah, I mean, pork can be okay. You just gotta watch, like, you know, watch your saturated fat intake, like, because that stuff can be brutal sometimes, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, pork is actually packed full of B vitamins. But you know, proteins are usually your best source. Even like, and then like other organ meats, like liver and stuff is really good. But like, who the heck likes liver?
Yeah, facts.
It's, you know, it's cheap, but I grew up eating that stuff. I'm over liver at this point. So all right, so let's go ahead and look at energy and work, right? So ATP, adenosine triphosphate, right, our primary source of immediate energy to keep our cells alive, right? So it's the primary source of cellular metabolism there. And basically, it's we store all that energy in these chemical bonds. Like when we look at ATP, you know, it is a big adenosine molecule and 3 little phosphates here. And, you know, this is where the energy is. The energy is trapped in between these little bonds here, particularly right here. So when we break that bond, tons of energy gets released, right? So that's, and there we'll put the, you know, that's the adenosine, and then again, triphosphate. Now, once that's broken down, it becomes ADP because you'll only have 2 phosphates instead of 3. And then your body can reconstitute that ADP to do more work. So once the chemical bond that holds ATP is broken, right, a whole bunch of energy is released and you are left with ADP. So now your body needs to have a way of remaking ATP. And that's what we're going to spend the rest of the day kind of looking at here. So the body breaks that phosphate, and it releases that energy. And you're left with ADP afterwards. Now, how do we make new ATP? Well, there's a couple different ways we can do this here. In the video we just watched, we started by talking about glycolysis, and then we moved into that aerobic or oxidative system. But there is one energy system that takes place first. So Kenny, Andres, this is new. This is the new energy system that we're going to talk about today. And it's your ATP PC system, or your adenosine triphosphate phosphocreatine system. So creatine, that weightlifting supplement that they sell in stores, is actually an enzyme. And well, at least it has enzymes in it. And that enzyme can actually break itself apart, and it can reattach phosphates. So if you were to break this phosphate off and you were left with ADP and an extra floating around phosphate, all the energy would get used up. The energy would be released. You're good to go now. But what's cool is your body can use this other little enzyme called creatine kinase. We'll say that's CK, right? So creatine kinase, it can actually use that. It can break itself apart. And so by breaking itself apart, it can reattach this phosphate right here. And now you are left with another molecule of ATP, which you can then break again. And you can do that over and over and over and over and over again. It's basically like having a little phosphate, break it off, reattach it, break it off, reattach it, break it off, reattach it. Every time you do that, boom, energy is released, right? This is super intense, super explosive, massively fast energy production, which is why it burns out really quick, and it only lasts what you can see here, about 6 to 10 seconds. So this is your super high intensity work. So yesterday, I told you guys I was doing heavy deadlifts. What I mean by that, I did literally 3 reps of deadlifting yesterday. So I was doing 6 sets of 3 repetitions, which means like 1 and then set it down, 2, set it down, 3, and then I sat around and rested for about 3 or 4 minutes before doing that again. So I was taking 3 to 4 minutes of rest, and I was only doing 3 repetitions in my workout yesterday, which means I was working at a really, really high intensity. And I was only lifting, my time under tension was only hopefully under 10 seconds, because what I was trying to do is I was specifically trying to target my ATP PC energy system. So this type of energy production is associated with maximum intensity lifts. That's your 1 up to 5 repetitions. If your goal is to increase your strength, this is the type of lifting that you want to do. So if your goal is to improve your 1 rep max on the bench press, you're like, I want to be able to bench 2 plates, right? I want to be able to bench 225. That's your goal. You need to target your ATP PC energy system. Now, if that's not your goal, let's say your goal is to maybe to be a little bit more like generally athletic, right? You don't want to focus only on like short duration, super explosive. You want to lift a little bit lighter, but you do want to lift still very heavy in general. Well, that's where glycolysis finally kicks in, right? And this is associated with about 30 to 50 seconds of work. And that's going through that regular glycolysis process, taking place in the fluid portion of the cell where glucose comes in and ATP plus pyruvic acid comes out, right? So this provides energy by breaking down glucose to create ATP for moderate intensity, moderate duration. So this is high intensity, low duration. This is moderate and moderate, right? So we usually associate this with around 6 to 12 repetitions. That's generally 30 to 50 seconds, right? I usually say like 30 seconds up to about a minute. If you're really good at glycolysis, it'll last a little bit longer, you know? So if you think about doing, let's say I was doing 6 reps, and you remember how I taught you guys a little bit about tempo, right? We do that 2-0-2 tempo. So that's 1-2-1-2, right? If I did a 2-0-2 tempo, that would be 4 seconds per rep. And if I did 6 reps, 4 times 6, that's about 24 seconds, which is landing pretty much right where I want it to at the beginning of glycolysis. So if I'm doing 6 reps, I'm basically training right in between my ATP PC system and glycolysis. So if my goal is to get big and strong, that might be a good place for me to aim, right around 6 or maybe 8 reps. If I did 8 reps, that would be 8 times 4 seconds per rep, right? So that would be 32 seconds. I'd be landing right in glycolysis. So right in the very beginning of glycolysis. So that would be very heavy, right? 6 to 8 repetitions. But what if I go all the way up to 12 repetitions? 12 repetitions, right? That's maybe I'm doing 3 sets of 12, the classic bodybuilder number, right? 3 sets of 12. So that's 12 reps times 4 seconds per rep. So that's 12, 24, that's about 48 seconds. That keeps me right in the very end of glycolysis. So if I'm good at glycolysis, that's great. That's going to keep me right where I need it to. But maybe I'm not good at glycolysis. Well, then maybe I would end up going oxidative early. And oxidative is where now I'm not producing lactic acid. I'm burning up lactic acid, right? Because remember, glycolysis results in the production of pyruvic acid, which we call pyruvates. Those pyruvates are in that non-oxygen environment, right? They're in the fluid of the cell because that's where glycolysis takes place. Well, what happens when you have like sugars in a non-oxygen environment? Kenny, do you use protein shakes?
I'm using aminos.
Okay.
Aminos. Protein, I have some, but I'm not using that at the moment.
Okay, well, you don't have to use it right now. But have you ever forgotten about your protein shake in the car? Or
yeah, definitely.
like when you were done drinking it and then like you get the left, you leave it, you forget about it for a day or two.
Yeah, yeah, happens.
Oh, it's the worst, right? You take that lid off and it's like, that scene from the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark where their faces melt and they get all blood. That's what it feels like. like whoo. Well, the reason for that is the sugars and even the proteins are getting turned into sugars. Like all of that, there are little bits of bacteria that are probably in your protein shaker. When you opened it and exposed it to air, bacteria got in. There's bacteria everywhere, there's probably bacteria on your lips when you were drinking it. And so now it's in the bottle, right? So you've introduced bacteria and there was some oxygen in the bottle because when you put the lid on and left in your car for a couple days, right? But all that bacteria, they were breathing in that oxygen, spitting out CO2 the same way you do, right? So now they burned up all the oxygen in your tube. And so then it started to ferment because now it's a no oxygen environment because there's no oxygen left in there. That's also why, if you ever notice when you take the cap off, you ever notice how it actually kind of pops off?
Yeah.
Almost like it's like carbonated in there, right? That's all that extra carbon dioxide gas. And so all of that's and that's why that smells so bad. It's fermented. Beer, wine, yogurt, kimchi, all of that's sourdough bread. That is all where you give yeast a little bit of sugar, a little bit of water, to get the kind of, allow everything to move around. And it's in this, and then you put it in a no oxygen environment. That's how we make sourdough bread. We let bacteria ferment, and that's what gives it that tangy, awesome, sour taste. That's what makes yogurt the way it is. So, that's what happens when you let pyruvates ferment. Well, the same thing happens in your cells. This is a zero oxygen environment. It's in the fluid of your cells. And so that pyruvate ferments and it becomes, instead of, citric acid, like we just talked about, it becomes lactic acid. And that lactic acid can now be used as an energy source in our oxidative metabolism. But if our goal is to experience muscular growth, hypertrophy, I don't want to get rid of my lactic acid. I want to let it sit and I want it to create cellular damage. That way my body can repair that cellular damage and make me bigger. How you guys following so far? Does that make sense?
Yes,
Just
sir.
the last part. I was thinking, maybe the lactate part I didn't understand well, but I think I'll get to it soon.
That's okay. So the lactic part, right? So glycolysis produces ATP, and as a byproduct, it makes pyruvates. And the pyruvates are there in the fluid. So because they're in the fluid and there's no oxygen, just like there was no oxygen, there was oxygen in your protein shaker until the bacteria ate it all up. Then there was no oxygen in there. That's why you can leave your shaker for a day and you're probably going to be okay. But if you leave it for a week, you take that lid off, it's going to kill you, right? Right? Because all the oxygen, once the oxygen's gone, fermentation starts to take place. So when pyruvic acid is left in a no oxygen environment, fermentation takes place. And because the fluid of the cell has no oxygen in it, it starts to ferment. And that's a good thing because now that fermented pyruvic acid has become lactic acid, and now that can move across the wall into our mitochondria. And now our mitochondria is like, lactic acid, that's a great fuel source, and it can use it to produce ATP. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Yeah, so far, yeah.
Cool. So that's where we're at there, right? So 30 to 50 seconds if your goal is hypertrophy, or 30 to 50 seconds if your goal is to target glycolysis, is if we want to think about it as like from a physiologic standpoint. So we got our power lifters, we got our bodybuilders. Well, now let's say we keep lifting beyond 50 seconds. Let's say we do, 2 minutes or even longer, right? Let's say it's a marathon, right? Well, that's where we start to get into our oxidative metabolism or our oxidative system. It's very complex compared to the other two because, this is where we start to see, whoops, did I lose you guys? Did I kick you out for a second? Oh, no. Oh, Kenny, we got two of you. So this is where we start to see our oxidative system, right? This is where we see the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. So this is the most complex. This is going to use your what we call substrates. That's your lactic acid, your pyruvic acid, and oxygen to produce ATP. So this is your duration of 2 minutes or greater. This is what we associate with low intensity, high duration exercise. 12 repetitions at the minimum, up to 20 repetitions, or 50 or 60 or 70. Like it's like when if you've ever done any boxing, right, and you're just throwing jabs and crosses over and over and over, you're doing a bunch of those, and it's a 2-minute round, right? So you get out of breath towards the end of that 2 minutes. That's exhausting, right? That's because you are getting into your oxidative metabolism. So your body's going, man, there's so much lactic acid. We got to convert all this lactic acid into ATP. So the more lactic acid you produce in this energy system, the more you are going to need to process it by bringing in more oxygen. That's when you start breathing heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier. And you're producing more and more and more and more and more energy. So this is actually, whoa, I closed my PowerPoint. What a dummy. I clicked the wrong spot. So this is actually what that's going to look like. Here's a little chart that shows you our duration. So this top right here, this part of the chart, this axis, is showing you where your energy, which energy system is being used. And then this bottom chart is your duration. So notice how 100% of your energy is coming from this red line. That's your ATP-PC system. That's your phosphagen system, right? The adenosine triphosphate phosphocreatine system. They even added the R there for creatine. But that's your immediate system, right? So look at how long it lasts. It lasts like 10 seconds, and then just like boom, it's out of energy, right? Like it can't do any more work. Well, that's, it lasts maybe 10 seconds, right? That's your ATP-PC system. If you're a power lifter, this is where you want to be. Your duration should be, and that's what's so funny about powerlifting. It's like, you get this big heavy barbell, and you're like, you get down there and you're like 1, and then 2, and then 3, boom. All right, I'm gonna go take a 3-minute nap. And then you come back and do it again, right? So you end up working for 10 seconds. Let's say you did 5 sets of 3, 6 sets of 3 like I did yesterday. You did 4, you did 5 exercises like I did yesterday, right? So let's say that's like 3 reps times 6 sets. That's 18 total reps. Say you did 4 exercises, right? 4 exercises. So you're gonna do 72 reps for your entire workout. And they were 3 seconds each. I'm sorry, there were 4 seconds each. Times, we'll say 4. So that means that you would spend in a 1-hour workout 288 seconds actually lifting. Divide that by 60, 4.8 minutes of work. The rest of it is spent resting. But that's a good thing, because that is how you are going to just beat up your nervous system. You're working so hard. That means that if you've only got 4.8 minutes to work out, you better make it intense. Now, if you're doing 3 reps and you're not working very hard, that's not going to do anything for anybody, right? Now, let's look at the opposite, or not the opposite, but let's look at the next system. Let's look at glycolysis. So glycolysis, this is blue line. So you'll notice glycolysis doesn't do anything for the first 10 seconds, and then it starts to kick in. And then finally, at the 20 to 50 second mark, it kind of takes over, and this is producing all your energy. And you'll notice this chart's a little bit different. It takes up to the 2-minute marker here. If you're very, very, very good at glycolysis, you can get it to last longer. Generally, guys, I want you to think of glycolysis as 30 to 50 seconds, 30 seconds to a minute, basically. That's really glycolysis. But you can see here, this chart makes it a little bit longer. So now glycolysis is producing energy, but then eventually it's like, dude, I can't produce any more lactic acid if you're going to keep doing this. So whoosh, as duration comes in, glycolysis has got a limiting factor. So then it has to pass the reins off. And that's where your aerobic metabolism, which starts at the very beginning, but really isn't the star of the show, has slowly been picking up speed. And now what's cool about long-term, we're seeing this is the 5-minute marker here. right? This could go for, 12, 16 hours. Like it can go forever. It can go unlimited, right? Non-stop. So this aerobic process can literally just go forever because it's bringing in oxygen for long-term energy, which means this is where our intensity is the highest. This is where our intensity is at medium or moderate. And this yellow line, that's low intensity. You're really not lifting very heavy, but that's why you can run a marathon in a couple hours. You can lift medium heavy weights for maybe a minute, and you can lift super heavy weights for about 10 seconds. Any questions on that, guys?
So far, so good. Pretty clear.
Awesome. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at these systems, separately here. Here's some facts on these systems. So your ATP-PC system is your phosphocreatine system. It uses hydrolysis to regenerate ATP by giving its phosphate to an ADP molecule. So basically, creatine will actually give up it's got, like I said, it's got a little phosphate on it, and creatine will give its phosphate away and attach it to that ATP molecule. So you'll have ADP, and creatine will give up its phosphate and give it to that ADP, re-giving you ATP, right? Again, it breaks it, puts it back on, breaks it, puts it back on. So this is very high intensity lifting, weightlifting, gymnastics, which are super explosive. That's the thing. It doesn't always have to necessarily just be heavy. It can also be really explosive, right? Like sprinting, like, let's see, what's the world record for the 100-meter dash? 9.58 seconds. Usain Bolt, right? 9 and a little over 9.5 seconds, right? That's pretty freaking fast. And that is definitely just in that ATP-PC system, right? So it doesn't always have to be super heavy lifting. It can also be like, gymnast. You see like a gymnast doing something super explosive where they're doing like a, crazy tumble, where they get off that like little vault thing and they fly through the air, that's pretty freaking explosive, right? Well, that's also very much an ATP-PC system thing. And here's what that actually looks like. Here's the enzyme. So you get ADP, and then there's some phosphate there. I'm sorry, there's some creatine there. What'll happen is creatine kinase, which is the enzyme, will take this phosphate off. You'll be left with a little bit of extra creatine at the end, and then reattach this phosphate to the ADP. So you have 2 over here. Now you're back to 3. Again. Then you have glycolysis, right? This is this is also an anaerobic process where you are basically converting glucose into pyruvic acid, and luckily that pyruvic acid can be used down here in a little bit. And it's producing ATP, and so you get 1 molecule of glucose, you get 2 ATP, and you get a whole bunch of that NAD. NAD becomes pyruvic acid becomes lactic acid eventually becomes energy. And like I said, moderate duration work, 30 to 50 seconds, right? So both of those are taking place in the goo, right? That's taking place in the fluid portion of your cell, no oxygen there. So those are anaerobic process. Remember, like asymmetric is like it means you're not symmetrical, right? An means opposite, aerobic means oxygen. So it's without oxygen, it's opposite of having oxygen. So these are both anaerobic processes. Then you have your aerobic processes. Your aerobic processes are aerobic glycolysis, which is sort of like where it's transferring from being like, anaerobic glycolysis. It's a little bit of glycolysis that takes place just on the inside of the mitochondria. Then you have your Krebs cycle, which is very aerobic. We talked a lot about that. And then the electron transport chain, which is also very aerobic. And so once you introduce oxygen into the mitochondria and you introduce that lactic acid into the mitochondria, you get a whole bunch of ATP, right? And that's why you're able to produce energy, you know, on the go. The thing is, when we think about this, you know, glycolysis is producing a lot of ATP really, really rapidly. Actually, you know what? I should rephrase that. Glycolysis is actually producing very little ATP, but it's making it super fast. So you're getting like 2 molecules of ATP like this, right? But what it's really producing a lot of is the pyruvic acid, which becomes lactic acid. The Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, they're making a lot of ATP, but they're not making it very fast. So instead, this is like, boom, 38 ATP. So it's like, and then it takes a little bit of while, and then there's 38 more. So it's kind of different, right? Like one of them is like shelling out $100 bills super, super, super quickly. And the other one is like shelling out a $100 bill very slowly. And those are just slightly different things. And that's why like the slow one means that like you introduce a whole bunch of ATP and you can kind of feed off of that and do some work for a little while. And then boom, you get another big explosion. And you can feed off that for a little while. That again is a very sustained, long duration type of energy production versus glycolysis, which is a super explosive, but you're exhausted very quickly form of energy production. Starting to see the difference. You guys start to see how like reps and sets and rest periods and duration, start to see how they all kind of come together and play together.
Yep.
Cool. Because really that's the main thing I want you to know. All right, so last thing that we're going to talk about here. We just got a little bit here and then we're going to wrap it up. So energy during exercise. So this is where we're going to tie all of that together. Intensity, which is your effort, and duration, which is your length of time, have an inverse relationship. They are opposites of each other. If one goes up, the other will go down. If this goes up, this will go down, right? You can't have both at the same time. It doesn't work that way. So they have an inverse relationship. As intensity climbs, duration will fall. And as duration climbs, intensity will fall. So we're going to build a little chart here. So we've got intensity here, right? So this is as intensity climbs, duration will fall. So this is our duration, right? So if my intensity is super high, I'm targeting glycolysis because it's a short duration. And if my intensity gets really long, well, then I start using the aerobic metabolism instead, right? So the amount of energy available from stored ATP, that's your phosphocreatine system, it's really small. Whereas the amount of energy from carbohydrates has a greater capacity, but it's still limited. You only have so much glycogen in your body. So the amount available from like stored fat in your body, guys, even if you have like a really low body fat percentage, the amount of stored energy that you have in the form of fat on your body is essentially unlimited. It's not actually unlimited. Obviously, eventually you'd run out of fat and you'd run out of energy and your body would just be like, that's it. I can't produce energy, and you'd be gone. So obviously it's not fully unlimited, but like it's unlimited in the sense that like, I mean, you're going to have to sleep before you run out of energy until you do it, you know, over and over and over again over several days or weeks. You know, that's why people can go on hunger strikes for weeks at a time, you know, and still survive. So, you know, the amount of energy from stored fat is huge on the body. Now, there are different costs for energy. This is some of the stuff that we need to consider when it comes to energy. You know, for instance, like body position actually plays a big role on how much. If I, you know, so far today, because I go on my run days, I work out in the afternoon. So I've only burned 1,069 calories today. I got my little watch here has a heart rate monitor on it. When my heart rate climbs, I'm using a greater percentage of my BMR, that number that we looked up earlier for you guys. But if I were just to sleep for 24 hours, it would, over the course of a 24-hour period, the number that it would show me on my watch would be exactly my BMR, which is somewhere pretty close to 1800. And so that 1800 would just be shown over the course of, so I'm at 1069 out of my free 1800 plus however many it's going to be today. But if I, you know what would happen if I wanted to, you know, burn a little more energy? I could just teach this lecture like this. I could have just stood up the whole time. You know, I could be up here and just be like, so, ATP, right? So body position means that, you know, I'm recruiting more muscles to stay standing. I could also just be doing some little, you know, little mini squats this whole time, right? Like if I were to do that, I'd be burning even more energy during this lecture, right? So body position plays a really big role in how much energy you're burning, which is where we have to consider, if I got a client who wants to lose weight, what's their priority? Their priority is to burn as many calories as possible. So let me ask you, we'll say, Andres, which of these would you choose? You have a client who wants to lose weight. Would you give them the bench press, or would you give them a standing cable chest press? So that's either, you know, laying on the bench, doing the bench press like this, or they do that one where they're in that staggered stance with the cable machine pressing like this.
Well, of course, the second one.
Why the second one?
I feel like it burns more fat in that way instead of the bench press. I feel like in the bench press, you're just laying down and not doing much.
That is very well reasoned. Yeah, the standing version is going to burn more calories. Now, do I like the bench press better if I'm trying to gain chest strength?
Yeah.
Absolutely. If I'm trying to gain chest strength, I should totally do the bench press. But if my goal is to burn calories, I want my client on their feet the whole time. I'm not going to do a seated bicep curl. I'm going to do a standing bicep curl. And we know that standing on one leg burns more calories than standing on two legs, because you have to use all your balance. So now I'm also going to have them do one leg. So now we're starting to see like where exercise selection becomes part of the conversation, right? As a trainer, what are your client's goals? If my client's goal is to gain weight, I don't want them doing a standing cable chest press. I want them on the bench.
Right.
So these are all like,
right.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, would that be considered like the second one you were doing, the standing? Would that be considered like cardio?
It could be. It could be. Now, okay. You know, is it cardio or not? That's where, you know, how much rest am I giving them? How many reps am I doing? So now I got to ask a few more questions to answer that, but it sure could be.
Okay.
It could be. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm in the airport right now, and I'm trying to like hear you. So.
Oh gosh, yeah, that's gonna be.
I'm sorry.
You're okay. You're okay. So body position plays a big role, right? Laying down burns less calories than sitting upright. Sitting upright burns less calories than standing. So that's all the conversations about, like, you know, exercise selection. Now, obviously, another thing that we need to consider: how do I just increase your metabolism? You know, because your metabolism is set by how much tissue you have, how many enzymes, like what your, you know, metabolic rate is, your thyroid, all that stuff. That's all. I can't affect most of that. But you know what I can do? I can burn a massive amount of calories on your body, which will make your body go, whoa, we need to fill that back up, right? I can burn your glycogen. I can burn a bunch of energy, right? And your body will spend time restoring, you know, restocking everything. And picture it like a pantry, right? If I went into your pantry and pulled a bunch of food out, you got to spend time putting it all back, right? Well, that is where we get my favorite concept in the world, which is called EPOC, excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, EPOC. Kenny, you made a ton of this yesterday with me in the park. And what EPOC is, EPOC, is it's kind of a concept. It's an elevated oxygen consumption after strenuous exercise. So Kenny, did you notice after yesterday that you were, you know, you didn't really struggle with being cold for the rest of the day?
Correct. Yeah, I was warm.
I think I felt warm
with
right?
the workout.
Yeah. So your blood was pumping like crazy. Well, you were also burning extra calories passively, because I made you burn so much oxygen for energy. We got you out of breath so many times that you had an elevated calorie burn that lasted after you left the park. That's the reason why, like, when you're running, you don't just catch your breath instantly. You're like, cool, I'm done. right? Like that's not how that works, right? You're like, even though you're not doing any work. So why are you still breathing hard if your work is done? You have to catch your breath. That's an excess oxygen consumption, right? But guess what? You're not doing very much work. You're sitting around catching your breath, yet you're still breathing like crazy. So now suddenly we've tapped into like this massive burning fat as a fuel source thing while we are, for the most part, resting. And we're going to come to that concept. I'm going to make that very clear here in just a second. So, by the way, this EPOC thing, it can last up to 72 hours. And that's why it's so beneficial to continue exercising. Then how do you make, how do you make as much EPOC as possible? Well, the answer to that is that you have to work hard. God dang it. You have to work hard in order for that to happen. So the greater amount of effort that you work, the harder you work, the more excess oxygen consumption you will have over the next maybe 72 hours. So this is where I always tell people, burning calories in the gym is good, but burning calories at home is better. So if you work really hard in the gym and then you just get to burn extra calories while you're at work, while you're sitting in the car, while you're watching Netflix, that's way better. So we definitely want to work at a high intensity. So that's where HIIT training got so popular over the last few years. This high intensity interval training is so great at burning extra calories. So that is where we, come to our last concept of the day, which is really similar to a concept that we already looked at once. But this is where we talk about the respiratory quotient. So your RQ, right? Remember this? This is the amount of carbon dioxide expired. It's the amount of CO2 you're exhaling versus the amount of oxygen that your cells are consuming. So at rest, we have an RQ of about 0.7. And when we're working as hard as possible, we have an RQ of 1.0. So you're always somewhere in a blend of 0 to 0.7. So now let's go back here and modify this chart. So intensity versus duration. As intensity goes up, duration is going to go down. Well, remember, we've also got our RQ here, right? So I'm going to put a little divider here. So now we've got our RQ, our respiratory quotient. Question. Oh, gotcha. No sweat, Andres. Yeah, I got you. No problem. So if my intensity goes up, right? So now we're going to see intensity going to. So if my intensity is up, right? Well, my respiratory quotient, my calories burned from carbohydrates is also going to go up. So during my respiratory quotient, my calories from carbohydrates are going to climb, right? And then we see the calories from, if I'm burning calories from carbs, that means that I'm not burning very many calories from fat. So now we see my calories burned from fats, right? That's going to go down. The higher my intensity, right? The higher my intensity, the more I'm burning carbs as a fuel source. And that means that like my CO2 exhaled is also going to go up, right? Because I'm consuming all that oxygen. So now we're going to see the reason for this is we're going to see CO2 exhaled goes up because the oxygen consumption goes up, right? So this is totally going back to that concept that we talked about. I think it was like last Thursday, right? As my intensity climbs, I use all my oxygen, so I have to get rid of CO2. And the more oxygen I use, the more I'm primarily relying on carbs as a fuel source. Now, a lot of people, when it comes to weight loss, right? A lot of people are like, I don't care about burning carbs. I want to burn fat, right? Well, guess what? You can burn 100% fat. You can actually burn all fat as a fuel source. You just have to be asleep to do it. When you are asleep, the only fuel that you are relying on for energy production is fat. That's your lowest intensity. As your intensity climbs, you start to rely more and more and more on carbohydrates. But obviously you don't burn very many calories when you're sleeping, right? So sleeping is maybe not the best way to lose fat. So that's why, we want to work really hard and burn energy as carbohydrate. We're going to use carbohydrates to burn energy. Now, yeah, we burn through our glycogen stores rather than our fat stores, right? But here's the thing. Next time you eat carbohydrates, you're not going to store those carbohydrates as fat. You're going to store them as carbs so you can refill your glycogen. So you're really getting ahead of the game here. This is a good thing. And then the other thing is, because you use carbohydrates and worked really, 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 really hard, what does that result in? Lots of EPOC. The harder you work, the more you have an excess calorie burn, right? Does that make sense, Kenny?
Oh yeah, makes sense.
Right? The harder you work, the more you burn energy later. So if I work really hard, yeah, the bummer is I mostly burn carbs for energy. But I'm going to burn extra calories later. And at some point, like I said, this can last up to 72 hours. So I'm going to go to bed, go to sleep, and I'm going to be 100% in that fat burning zone. And I'm burning more calories while I'm sleeping than I would have because of how hard I worked earlier in my workout. And now that's where leads to my favorite little joke here that I always tell people, which is, burning calories in the gym is good, but burning calories in bed is better. And then people are welcome to interpret that however they want. So at rest, fat is your primary fuel source. At full maximum intensity effort, carbs are your primary fuel source. And so we are at some mixture of that. All right, so intensity goes up, duration goes down. Intensity goes up, carb burning goes up. Intensity goes down, fat burning goes up, right? Any questions on that, Kenny? Questions? Nothing?
Yeah, pretty clear everything. Yeah.
All right, man. Well, let's summarize everything up today. So, summary, bioenergetics, we talked about that. It's the study of how we transform energy through various, chemical reactions. Metabolism, all chemical reactions. Your substrates that produce that energy, proteins, fats, and carbs, right? ATP is what we are referring to when we refer to energy. That's the energy that we use. And your RQ, your respiratory quotient, is what determines, are you burning carbs? Are you burning fat? We actually really like burning carbs because by burning carbs, it means I'm working hard. And by working hard, I will burn more fat later when I am at a higher percentage of fat burned. That concept will become very, very clear in our weight loss class that's coming at the end of this module. So the end of this mod, your very first program design class is going to be program design for weight loss clients. And we're going to talk all about this again. So this will become really, really clear. Well, dude, any questions at all today? That's all I got for you.
So on the NASM book, right? What pages are we gonna study on it?
Read chapter 4 today.
Chapter 4. Okay.
Okay. Let me make sure I'm right about that again.
just to double check.
Yeah. Yes, chapter 4. Read chapter 4. And you will notice it's going to go in the same order as this PowerPoint. Everything I said today will be in chapter 4. And yeah, man, that's all I got. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. I'll see you tomorrow.